Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here, and thanks for the invitation. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. And special thanks to Jeremy, who has been proven to be the master of details and has just treated us all so wonderfully. Yay! Yay. My topic, DEI, the death of merit and excellence in STEM and medicine, is a big one. This development has been a very long time coming, but it certainly feels fast-tracked in the last couple of years. It's been a challenge to keep ahead of all the late-breaking news in this arena, and I've been making day-by-day changes to my presentation, like the very recent Supreme Court decision, which affects only discrimination in admissions. This decision is a good start, but there are a number of loopholes of concern. That said, this talk is primarily about what happens after they get in, okay? The corrosive impact of the nonstop DEI mantra infused in the curriculum and almost every aspect of student life these days. Unfortunately, none of that really goes away with the SCOTUS decision. I can only hope to give you the big picture of the scene. I'll be citing a number of resource articles. I have a resource sheet, a reference sheet with all the links and all of that, and I'm happy to email it to you, or we can have Jeremy email it out. And of course, I will hopefully have a few minutes left for Q&A, and I'll be around. Please just feel free to come up and talk to me about any of this. My name is Linda Sweeney, and I'm the founder of Alumni and Donors Unite, formed in 2019 with the purpose of restoring academic freedom in higher education. And I say it like that because it's only now that I realize how grandiose and naive that ambition was. And so how did I get here, and why do I feel so passionately about the need to restore sanity in higher education, particularly in STEM and medicine? Well, I will take you on the journey. First and foremost, I'm not a scientist and I'm not an academic. I'm an outsider, which I think gives me some objectivity. I'm curious and I'm just a concerned citizen who became aware, was kind of awakened to a problem, a very serious problem, and I realized I was yelling at my TV and shaking my fist and all that, and that was just not doing any good at all. So the issues that so disturbed me back in the ancient days of 2018 seem perfectly quaint to what we're talking about today. And so how did things get so radical so fast? I'm sure many of you have heard of the Overton window, and that is how the winds of political discourse and policy change. John Overton contended that pushing for extreme positions is more effective at changing public opinion. Also, like the foot in the door technique used in sales, one can advocate for small but gradually larger shifts in policy. And we have certainly seen that. Very quickly, for 17 years, I was the executive director of the Corporate Directors Forum, and our mission was to help directors of public and for-profit companies be better directors by staying current on all the latest issues in corporate governance. And so a few years into my role, we started an annual conference where we brought in the big institutional investors, the proxy advisors, pensions like CalPERS and CalSTRS, the big asset managers like BlackRock, State Street, SEC regulators, and all of the players to talk with directors and management teams about the topics of the day. And I first saw these asset managers and the proxy advisors start to make suggestions to companies, and started simply like better working conditions in foreign factories and cleaning up environmental damage in foreign countries. And all of this seemed reasonable, and companies took their suggestions, of course, wanting to keep the asset managers happy and investing in their companies. Well, that is how it started, but we know that is not where it has ended up. Asset managers started to become more aggressive and pushing social agendas, demanding things like, we want X number of women on boards, you need to stop divesting in fossil fuels, you got to disclose your carbon footprint, and a myriad of expensive sustainability requirements, actually warping the very role of the corporation, which had traditionally been to maximize shareholder value, and essentially pulling them into social activism. And this is where the advent of the whole ESG, environment, social, and governance movement had its roots, and they have since added diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the even more extreme corporate equity index. The pension funds and asset managers just kept getting bigger, and companies fell over a barrel to comply, and today, unfortunately, they're almost at complete capitulation to the demands of the asset managers who are engineering the behavior of companies. I believe it was Joe that said, This is the world we live in today. Well, how did we get to this world? This is how. Companies are scored and invested in based on their compliance with these ESG, DEI, CEI indexes. And I really don't think that most companies go along with this or believe it, but they need those scores. So recently, an interview resurfaced of Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, now with an almost unthinkable, I think it's close to $10 trillion under management. He, with the CEO of Vanguard sitting next to him, brazenly using shareholder money, that's our money, our pension funds, our 401ks, to fund their personal, social, and global agenda. So here is just a 1 minute, see if I can. This is our friend, Mr. Larry Fink.
You now make a point of, that's an investment criteria for you.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. 54% of the incoming class are women. We added 4 more points in terms of diverse employment this year, and what we are doing internally is if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted. Okay,
we're doing the same thing.
And so it's just you have to force behaviors. And if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted. And that's not recruiting, it is development, as Ken said. And ultimately, it's still going to take time, but I am just as much shocked as Ken is that we have not seen more opportunities. And we're going to have to force change.
I think that's off now. Thank you, Mr. Fink. And sitting next to him was the CEO of Vanguard. So I bring this in, I mean, first of all, no one asked the shareholders, first and foremost, and in his own words, it's being forced. And by the way, the other day, he was taking some heat because this video resurfaced. And then he started playing victim and said that he's going to stop using the term ESG because it's being weaponized against him. But of course, that doesn't change anything. It's still in full play. And I bring this in because these accelerating DEI social and political demands show an eerily familiar pattern to what has happened in higher ed. And all these forces are connected, as we will get into. So anyway, after 17 years, I was looking for the next thing to do, and I happened to attend a conference and found myself sitting with 10 college students just were sitting around, and they were from all around the U.S., and I had been seeing a number of these, college crazy clips on the news here and there, safe spaces, trigger warnings and all that. And I just said, what's it like to be a college student today? Is this true, or are these one-offs? What's the deal? Just to show, this is the college that I remember, bucolic, peaceful, beautiful. And if you drive by, they all look about the same. So, it's really hard to know what's going on behind those walls because we all think of college as we knew it. But looks are deceiving, right? So, for sure, I was very startled at what they had to say about trigger warnings and safe spaces, but the more disturbing thing was they were talking about self-censoring in class. And remember, this was 4 years ago. And a couple had mentioned that they had only had maybe 1 or 2 conservative college professors in their 4 years, and that was another shock to me because I don't ever remember even knowing the political leanings of any of my professors. So that's another development, right? And then, let's see if I hope I can get, yeah, okay. So this is the old days. You see, you got your Trump-free zone. You got somebody hugging a teddy bear. And they had these places they could go. And there was free speech zones where you could say what you wanted within this zone. These are the good old days, by the way. So shortly after this, I met a family who donated about $40 million to their alma mater. And sparing you the gory details, they were very upset with some of the rudeness and intolerance that they saw on campus. And they went to the university president and said, what are you going to do about this? The university president, gave them lip service essentially, but did nothing to stop it. So they decided, what, we're going to just stop funding. We are going to start funding things that match our values, and we're out of here. And that was my aha moment, okay? That is when this idea occurred to me. I was looking for that other thing to do. This idea, if you're not happy with your school, stop funding it. Don't donate, starve the beast. But I quickly learned that most donors have no idea what's going on. They're back on that old picture, right? And they often have deep allegiances to their schools, and they have NIMBY syndrome, which is, if it is happening, it can't be happening at my school. So I set out to study the problem. I talked to as many stakeholders as I could, stakeholders at students, parents, alumni, donors, taxpayers, faculty, just trying to understand what was going on. And I soon learned change was not going to happen from inside the academy. That's where the problem was originating. It was going to have to come from the outside. So the key would be to inform the stakeholders, because when they do know, they do want change. The goal then became to identify the stakeholders. How do I go to identify the stakeholders at a school, give them the facts, and help them self-organize, per school, to insist on change. I knew if they had the facts and they considered the ROI, they would get out their pitchforks. I just knew it. And then this was just from a couple of days ago, Steve Moore's newsletter, and the data is from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics showing that college tuition costs have more than tripled after adjusting for inflation since 1980. Is the product 3 times better? Hardly. But it does show the government is backstopping an ever-increasing number of loans, both graduate and undergraduate school loans. And obviously the schools are just, since they're backstopped, they just keep raising the tuitions. And of course, as we all know, this whole taxpayer picking it up thing. So we picked a school and decided to test our model. We started with the University of San Diego, and we picked it because it has a relatively small endowment, and we figured that with less money in the bank, they're going to be more responsive to the stakeholders. They don't have $8 billion endowment. And a red flag to me right then and there was they had hired a director of engineering justice to dismantle the myth of meritocracy in the United States and in the engineering discipline. This seemed very off mission to me for a small private Catholic university to take on merit in engineering. So we commissioned the woke takeover of the University of San Diego, and that's available on our website. It's fascinating. It's like 30 pages. Pretty scary stuff. Fortunately, I met Terry and Carolyn Gannon. You met Terry earlier. They've joined me on the journey, with Terry serving as our chairman and about 10 other hats. He's very tenacious. You could see that. Very curious strategist and researcher. And he landed on this idea that we're going to scour the websites of any university, and you can glean the state of DEI. It's all there. You just have to know where to look. So after the San Diego report, we did reports on Chapman University, MIT, the University of Colorado, Pepperdine. We did some launch off of Harvey Mudd. We used some of the data from your report. And we pretty much saw the same pattern everywhere. And that is the woke institution, okay? You see the beginning, you got to control the strategy and the culture, you promote groupthink. The cancel culture is kind of there. That's required for censorship. And I have the slides going to be in the deck. Anyone's welcome to it. All the way down to freedom of speech has to be suppressed, increase indoctrination, and you train to reinforce them. This install is a myriad of entangled policies and culture. And unfortunately, it has to be unraveled school by school, because every school is set up a little different, the trustees and so forth. And you really have to have insiders at the school telling you what's going on, including some students. And students and faculty all usually will speak to you, but under anonymity, which is another strange thing. So then it wasn't long before we realized, I should have known, but the big schools have huge endowments. And they listen politely, but they basically ignore donor requests that they disagree with. They just blow it off. Now, informed donors have already stopped giving, some of them, but there's still a lot of money that could be cut off. Although most schools get huge endowments, money from the federal government. They're not endowments. They get grants from the federal government, National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation. And this is just the top 10 institutions, universities, medical schools. And how much NIH, this is only the NIH funding that they get in fiscal 2022. And just look at the very first one, University of San Diego, San Francisco. They get almost $393 million a year, which explains why a $40 million donor, it hurts if a lot of them don't fund, but it doesn't have as much sway as I thought it would. So what we found also is that the government doesn't really fund inquiry. It's more cynically, tell me the answer you'll get, and I'll tell you if you're going to get the funding. Research tends to follow the funding. The funding tends to follow the policy of the NIH or the funding organization, and institutions who are getting that kind of money tend to confirm policy. For an example, However you feel about the COVID vaccine, neutral on that. The UCSF chief medical officer issued a verbal directive to all medical staff. They are specifically instructed not to associate the COVID vaccine to any injuries. So even if they believe the vaccine caused the injury, they're not allowed to talk to the patient about it. Okay, how's that in the patient's best interest, first of all? And second of all, wasn't Dr. Fauci the head of the NIH? I don't think you have to take a big step there. Now, understandably, parents brag about nothing more than where their kid's going to go to college. It's still viewed as the brass ring. And for decades, most people just accepted that college is uber liberal. Students are going to come to their senses. They're going to get out in the real world. Well, like so much for that, right? We thought companies wouldn't put up with it. Well, companies are completely in on it. So a quick distinction I want to make is between liberal and left. And what's happened is universities are now at left. So in the ensuing years, this craziness that just looked kind of fun, hugging teddy bears and all of that, spun from that to unimaginable events on almost a daily basis, an assault on societal norms. I mean, every day there are more coming out of this. So I had hundreds to choose from, but I just picked 3 for the heck of it. To be representative. University, you might have heard of some of these. The University of Cincinnati student gets a 0 for using the term biological women. From the University of Cincinnati. She was doing a report on female athletes, the changes in female athletes throughout history and so forth. And she got a 0 because of that term. And this is what her teacher said, it's under the second column. Olivia, this is a solid proposal. However, the terms biological women are exclusionary and not allowed in this course as they further reinforce heteronormativity. Please reassess your topic and edit it to focus on women's rights, not just females, and I'll regrade. So I kind of read that as turn your paper back in, saying what I want you to say, and then we'll talk. And that does not seem right. Okay. Johns Hopkins, for some reason, they have a diversity and inclusion department who saw fit to use God knows how many committee meeting hours, time, and treasure to create an LGBTQ glossary. And after all of that, they came up with the definition for a lesbian, which is a non-man attracted to non-men. And this updated definition includes non-binary people who may also identify with the label. I don't know what that means. And then they also, just to be fair, a gay man is a man who is emotionally attracted to other men. Gay is an adjective, not a noun, as in he is a gay man. Thank you, Johns Hopkins. Not sure what that, again, just think of the time and treasure and talent and where else this money could be going. This is one of my favorites, and this just happened a little while ago. You might have seen the story. Mayo, physiologist and professor of anesthesiology, touted on the clinic's own website as one of the world's leading experts on human performance and exercise physiology, gets suspended and threatened with possible contract termination. Why? Because he told the New York Times, when it comes to telling the difference between biological males and females, you see the divergence immediately as testosterone surges in the boys. There's a dramatic difference in performance. So there, he's under suspension for that. And right now, I know him personally, Tucson. He's from Rincon High. If testosterone, this is my aside, if testosterone doesn't improve performance, why is it monitored by the Olympics and all sports organizations, right? So there you go. Michael Joyner, Dr. Michael Joyner, which, by the way, I met him way back in 1979. We were both back here. Okay, that's why I was surprised. I just see, oh my goodness, the Mayo Clinic, and that turned out to be him. All right, the other thing is, this slide might sound like a bit hyperbolic, but it really is not. It's very on point. Niall Ferguson, a senior at the Hoover Institute at Stanford and a fellow at Harvard. North American academia is in the grip of a hideous mania, a cross between the early modern witch craze and Mao's Cultural Revolution. Essentially, innocent individuals are having their reputations and careers destroyed. Everyone else cowers and terrified that they're going to be canceled next. And that's not hyperbolic. I mean, it is happening. And even if you get canceled or threatened with cancellation and you get saved by a whole bunch of legal maneuvering and so forth, it does set a pall over. Everyone else gets the message. I mean, maybe you were saved and you could say, yay, I won. But pretty much then even more people shut up. So what is the state of free speech? Let's just take a quick peek at one school that any parent would burst with pride to have their child attend. Princeton. So a Princetonians for Free Speech study, this was done this year, 2023. And I will summarize the results pretty quickly. So first of all, I was excited. I see this, 9 in 10 students say free speech and academic freedom are important. Great. But then you dig into the key findings, and you find out that only 18% of the students say that they are familiar with Princeton's free speech code. And 48% of the students say that any speech that uses discriminatory language or language that a class of persons finds offensive or hurtful should not be allowed. It goes on from there, but the last two, 70% of students say they would be very or somewhat uncomfortable publicly disagreeing with the professor in class on a controversial topic. And 56% of students say they would be very or somewhat uncomfortable expressing their views in a class on a controversial topic. This is not the school, this is not the higher ed that I went to, certainly. And I think many of you. One somewhat good, I guess, something that gave me a little bit of hope was that 2/3 of the students don't approve of an anonymous record-keeping system where faculty, administrators, or other students can report anonymously on concerning behavior without other students knowing what's in the report. So 500 schools have, you might want to look this up, have installed Maxient software. It's described by detractors as Stasi-like, because you really don't know. People can say whatever they want. And I'm not sure they're trying to allow more access to it, but most kids have no idea what's in their folder. What was heartening about this is that so many of them didn't like this idea. When it gets personal, it starts to make sense. So what is woke idea? What is it, right? It's called by a number of names, so critical social justice, CRT, but basically it's an ideology that divides the world into aggrieved minorities, the oppressed, and oppressive majorities, reducing the individual to their group identity only. It's grounded in inalterable characteristics like race and gender. Therefore, to be BIPOC, you might have heard that, Black, Indigenous, and people of color suggests underserved and underrepresented, and white connotates privilege. Okay, so grew up in foster care, poverty, nope, white privileged. You just don't know it or you don't want to admit it. So one of the catalysts for this word twisting was the postmodernism ideology. Briefly described, this is why I think of it very briefly, this idea that there is my truth and your truth. But now, the way I see it, there's my opinion and there's your opinion, but there's only one truth. And in postmodernism, you can make words mean whatever you want them to mean to adjust to your truth. So the definitions change really fast, but for the moment, that's what they do. They keep moving, shape-shifting. For the moment, quickly, diversity then, traditionally collaborative with all people from diverse backgrounds. Diversity now, giving priority to the oppressed groups over the oppressors to atone and balance out past injustices. Inclusion then, essentially, creating a space safe where everyone is welcome. Inclusion now means you must think alike and agree to the oppressor groupthink, supposedly to protect minority groups, pardon me. And then the worst of all is this equity. That's the one that's really being abused. Historically, it was a reference to equal justice under the law for everyone, which of course we would all want. That's where you want equal treatment for everyone all the time. Equity now requires to standardizing of educational outcomes to get all the groups to the finish line at the same time, and therefore it requires increasing representation of some groups, even if it discriminates against members of other groups. And this is folly, we know it, right? Critical to our very survival is the fact that people are all different with unique skills and talents. That's how we have survived. It could be math, it could be athletic, it could be verbal, you could be good at languages. You put a paintbrush in my hand, no. It looks like a 2-year-old did something. I don't have that talent and I'm okay with that. But to the woke, any and all outcomes are attributed to, if it's between between people of color and white people, that's how they do it, it's attributed to racism, which must be rooted out. And that is what woke is all about, the rooting out of all of this so-called systemic racism, which can never happen because the premise is flawed, right? And then this is just for fun. I don't know if you guys like Dilbert, but anyway, if you can't read it, it says, as the new head of DEI, I demand you stop giving performance reviews. Equity will never be achieved until you pay all employees the same, no matter how they perform. And then the boss says, I was planning to pay you more than your peers. Okay, let's try your plan. Okay, so this, sadly, this whole social justice DEI thing has infiltrated hiring policies, student orientations, the curriculum, mandatory trainings for faculty and students, and there's been a DEI hiring spree throughout the academy. Like how many? Mark Perry, the University of Michigan, has done a really deep dive research on this. I will highlight a couple of the, on this. It does require a deep dive because they don't want you to find it. It's fairly opaque, but he did it. And actually, this slide in particular is from the Heritage Foundation, but it's from 2021. So that's 2 years, and so the data is even greater now. The schools have been overrun, essentially, with DEI staff. University of Michigan, when I first started knowing about this, had 80 such staffers in 2018. I found that shocking, but in this graphic in 2021, they had 163, and now they are up to about 200. Now, Michigan is an outlier, as you can see. They have more than anyone else, and I don't really know why. But the average is about 50 to 60. And Mark also did the deep dive work of how much do these people get paid anyway? And, you know, it's nice work if you could get it. The top one, 380, 250, 211, 200, 200. I mean, it's fantastic. Their total compensation at the University of Michigan for 1 year, $18 million. And for scope and scale, that would pay for approximately 1,100 tuitions. In comparison, MIT has about 95, and that number's debated because they can't, even the MIT group can't get to the bottom of how many there are. Doing what? What are the metrics? How do we know when we're done? What is the ROI? That exceeds the scope of that could be a whole other talk, but for reference, I'm just going to show you what's happening at MIT briefly. And this is a screenshot, sorry. This is the bias response team membership, and look at all those people, and they're all very high-ranking MIT officials. And it is a working group of subject matter experts who strategize to address reported incidents of bias and discrimination impacting the MIT community. Okay, there's that one. That's on their website, and it's also in the deck for a close-up look. But there's also, we're not stopping with that, MIT's Discrimination and Harassment Response Office, and that is and for the entire MIT community for concerns related to discrimination and discriminatory harassment, including sexual misconduct under Title IX federal regulations. This is our team. And who knew? I mean, I see 10 women, by the way. I don't know about you, but I see 10 women there. What is it? I'm not supposed to use that phrase, I guess. Who knew that MIT was such a hotbed of discrimination and bias, right? And then, this isn't something else, it's called I'll just show you. This is, in one day, they hired 6 new assistant deans, this was 2 summers ago, 6 new assistant deans for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and this is very common, it's called cluster hiring, where they bring in a big batch at one time. It's something I'd never heard of before either, cluster hiring? Now, fealty to this ideology is pretty much a prerequisite for working in education. Most schools now require some sort of forced pledge of allegiance to the narrative. Now, nowadays, more people, because they're getting heat for that, more people are saying, well, you don't have to sign it. But then, I mean, heck, you might as well have a scarlet letter, right? You didn't sign. Now, we're going to go back to the Overton window. This is can you guys see that one? So it started so simply, like, we just want to be accepted. We just want to be treated like everyone else. Sounds reasonable. And now we're at celebrate us, kneel for us, obey our pronouns, give us your children. And of course, go along, or you're racist, homophobe, the usual litany. Now, while this has been encroaching and metastasizing for decades, in 2020, obviously, it exploded extra. And some of it was because of the death of George Floyd, but some of it was because of a guy by the name of Harvard PhD Ibrahim Kendi, founder of the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research. He wrote a best-selling New York Times book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And he has a single answer, in his own words, to the cause of all black-white disparities: systemic racism. Now, his muddled premise is arguably flawed, Yet, by endlessly espousing it with no data, Kendi, whose speaker fees are between $30,000 and $40,000 a pop, is able to justify this equality of outcomes agenda, right? So once people buy the premise and abandon facts and logic, the field is open to persuasive but non-provable rhetoric. So that was his book. Now, I must admit to a bit of petty Schadenfreude. Please forgive me. This was a tweet that he sent out, this is where the Schadenfreude begins. More than a third of white students lied about their race on college applications, and about half of these applicants lied about being Native American. More than 3/4 of these students who lied about their race were accepted. So this was the takedown. Interestingly, the tweet backfired as the study undermines his theory. If white students are privileged for being white, there would be no need to claim minority status. There must be some privilege in claiming minority status. And then he posted this, then deleted it right after he realized he just debunked his life's work in one tweet. And then finally, oops. So, so here's another way of saying it. Professor Mark Goldblatt wrote a very new book called I Feel, Therefore I Am, The Triumph of Woke Subjectivism. And essentially what he's saying is, if you're arguing on the base of empirical evidence and logic, that's hard. I mean, it's really hard. You've got to win the argument, and if you don't have a good argument, you're going to lose. But on the other hand, if sentiment is raised as a methodology to counter empirical evidence and standard logic, anybody can play. In postmodernism, anybody can play, and they are, and that's what we're seeing. I think Voltaire had it right back in 1765. Truly, whoever can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. Now, good. How did this corruption make its way over to STEM and medicine? I mean, why did we think that the contagion was going to stay put in liberal arts colleges? We were wrong. It did not stay put. This is a screenshot of a report I'll tell you about, so I know it's hard to read. Led by the University of Chicago geophysicist Dorian Abbott, a group of 29 scientists listed here wrote a 26-page paper titled In Defense of Merit in Science, to explore the origins of the current attack on merit-based science. As reported in the National Association of Scholars, it only found a home in the Journal of Controversial Ideas. So, and that's it, merit is controversial? And seriously, that's exactly true. So this is a 26-page paper, which if you read it all, it's the full story. However, this isn't going to do this is one slide, but it's a key highlight, and it shows this postmodern twisting of words. And note the difference between liberal and critical social justice epistemology when it comes to the scientific method. So on the blue side, provisional truth is attainable. On the critical versus denies existence of objective reality. Fallibilism, anyone can be wrong, replaces the concept of truth by multiple narratives and alternate ways of knowing. One more, accountability, the openness to conceding and correcting errors, versus denies the legitimacy of other viewpoints and rejects the theory that a theory can be proven or disproven by the empirical process. So this is what we're dealing with. Now, I don't need a new slide yet. So let's start with STEM. Let's take a peek at STEM to begin with. And the corruption of STEM is widespread throughout the academy, but I think the case study of what's happened at MIT offers a good example of all. I mean, we see MIT as the crown jewel of STEM in the world. And in October 2021, MIT canceled a lecture by this professor, Dorian Abbott, because of activist backlash for his views in an Newsweek op-ed where he criticized DEI standards and strongly advocated instead for a framework, merit, fairness, and equality. Okay? So rather than defending his free speech, the MIT administrators caved to activists and denied him his talk, which was going to be about planetary atmospheres. It had nothing to do with DEI. Nothing. Now, the good news in this is because it was MIT, the story caught fire with national media and was sort of an incendiary event that shook some of the MIT alumni. They were shocked, what? And not official alumni group, no. Most school alumni groups are cheerleaders and fundraisers for the school, and they really don't want to hear anything bad about the school. But this external group of PhD, I call them brainiacs, were shocked and awakened from their NIMBY delusion and formed the MIT Free Speech Alliance. And so they are now, this alliance is now fighting to maintain MIT as the leading STEM university in the world. Now, they're creating a permanent infrastructure with a board, with bylaws, and they've hired an executive director. I mean, they're building a beachhold at MIT, outside of MIT, but there to serve as the eyes and ears on the ground and to be a watchdog and just pretty much, this has got to be done school by school. So you can see why this is quite a slog and takes a tremendous amount of energy. But anyway, also on the website, and they have a whole, there it is, whoops, MIT Free Speech Alliance, and they have newsletters and all sorts of stuff, and all kinds of activities and events. They've really taken it very seriously. They were very disturbed. Also, I highly recommend the Babbling Beaver. It's a free subscription. It's where an anonymous MIT alumni started the MIT equivalent of the Babylon Bee, using humor and savage mockery, and it is savage, to stir the pot and needle the administration, which we presume they hate. And that is a good thing, right? And oftentimes there's a byline at the bottom, and it says, if you think we're making this up, you're not clicking on the links. So be sure and click on the links. Okay. So how are they doing? Is this working? They're chipping away. I mean, they're asking a lot of difficult questions. They figure it's going to take years to turn this around, which I think is, I mean, to me, I'm too impatient, but I understand. They're committed to saving MIT, but they're slowed by this DEI onslaught that we talked about earlier. It's hard to get a hold of a tsunami like that kind of staff, that kind of money. The MIT Alliance, they're all a bunch of volunteers, committed, but they're volunteers. Okay, now I'm going to share a few revealing facts about the leadership team at MIT that reveals the interconnectedness between science and politics that we have seen throughout. Okay, the latest president, the brand new president, MIT President Sally Kornbluth, in her inaugural address recently, she called climate change the greatest scientific and societal challenge of this or any age, adding, above all and most urgently, the Institute will continue to marshal a bold, tenacious response to the runaway, I hate to even say, crisis of climate change, especially given what we've talked about. So that's the president of MIT, the new one. The chancellor, I think she was installed maybe 2 years ago. Melissa Nobles shared in her MIT bio that her international comparative research focuses on restorative justice in light of ethnic and racial conflicts. Her current research is focused on examining racial murders in the American South, 1930 to 1954. And then, this, to me, is kind of the pièce de résistance, right? So this was on June 13th. Join us for a hashtag MIT Shutdown STEM Day. This was not a club event. This was a university-inspired, sponsored event. A day of reflection and education to learn and reflect on the impact of systemic racism in STEM. There was a film on the issue of social belonging in the context of STEM and the effect it has on the lives of underrepresented people of color who are pursuing an education or career in STEM or have decided to leave because of an overwhelming feeling of not belonging. Read the whole thing. As I said, it wasn't a club event, but it was hosted at the bottom here by the MIT School of Science, Math, Physics, Chemistry, Biology. All must comply. Now we move on to medical schools. Nowhere is this topic more important than in medical education. Now you can make a case for architecture, aviation, but I think in medicine it's about to get real. The next few items are from a very detailed report. There it is. Real Clear Investigations piece. That was in April. Actually, it was 1 year ago. And everything in a year has gotten way worse, but I thought this piece just was massive in what it covered. And it cites the peer review Health Affairs, which is considered the leading journal of health policy thought and research. The editor-in-chief, Alan Weil, has committed the journal to dismantling institutional racism. And they are rolling out a cadre of anti-racist scholars to transform speculative concepts into fact. This is not the weirdest one. This is pretty middle of the road for one of the things they're studying. Is black smoking to alleviate stress tied to police harassment? Yeah, so, and this effort to document, I only have time, I would put a bunch more in. The effort to document and quantify racism is being advanced by the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, Scientific American, which last year ran an article entitled Modern Mathematics Confronts Its White Patriarchal Past, among others, okay? Dr. Stanley Goldfarb, board-certified kidney specialist and former professor at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine and founder of an organization called Do No Harm, said it well. This approach just drives me crazy. It's basically finding associations and claiming it proves causality. He ended up being considered way too outspoken. He said a few other things that didn't jive with the I don't know what you call it, with the narrative, and became a emeritus. He was a professor, now he's retired. And this is from Michael Shermer. I don't know if any of you know him, but he's no conservative. Founding publisher of Skeptic Magazine, said it well. Confounding science with political ideology is never good. They're saying we already know the answer, and the answer is racism. They're just reducing complex problems to one variable. And his monthly column was terminated at Scientific American after 18 years in a disagreement over what he saw as a woke ideology infecting the publication. So once again, don't like it, kill the messenger. From the same Real Clear piece, the AMA condemns equal treatment and meritocracy as malignant white supremacist ideologies that obscure true power and sight of responsibility. Now, we're going to jump back real fast. There's an article from Welcome to America's Radicalized Medical Schools. The university, remember, back to University of California, San Francisco, School of Medicine, all that money, argues that medical students should be segregated based upon race during their education in order to better facilitate anti-racist medicine, among dozens of other initiatives like adding a social justice pillar to the school's curriculum. And UCSF also wrote in the New England Journal of Medicine saying that because of the legacies of colonialism and racism in medical training that have been historically white-centered learning, they argue that medical school structures are re-traumatizing for BIPOC students. Okay, so now, if you'd like to treat yourself to a gander at the AMA's 86-page, I have to breathe deeply, okay, inhale before I start. Organizational Strategic Plan to Embed Racial Justice and Advance Health Equity. This is an 86-page deal, 21 through 23. I'm not going to, obviously, I'm going to come close to reading it all, but here are the key findings that they plan to initiate and aggressively push forward the following approaches. I'll just read the first and the last. 1, embedded racial and social justice throughout the AMA, enterprise culture, systems, policies, and practices. And then foster pathways for truth, racial healing, reconciliation, and transformation for the AMA's past. Now, once again, we see the forcing of an entire profession into arbitrary social activism, which far exceeds its true purpose, and of course, the Hippocratic Oath. From another article, I keep saying you must read this. Another must-read piece from Heather McDonald with City Journal and the Manhattan Institute, The Corruption of Medicine. She asks, the advocates of this change insist that it's essential to improving minority health. But what if they are wrong? If it turns out that individual behavior and other genetic dispositions have a more proximate influence on health than supposed racism? Now, that's a very good question, right? And also in her research in this piece, she said that the drug trials diversity gauntlet has just begun. In May 22, a physician scientist lost her NIH funding for a drug trial because the trial population did not contain enough blacks. The drug under review was for a type of cancer that blacks rarely get. It was thought better to foreclose development than to conduct a trial without black participants. So, I mean, it's everywhere. Shoot, how am I doing on time? I better hustle. I'm doing, okay, I think, I can do it. So anyway, just quickly, did I put her, yeah, you guys can read that. As long as alleged racism remains the only allowable explanation for racial differences, we're going to continue tearing down excellence, putting lives as well as civilizational achievement at risk. Now, this is a very busy slide, so I apologize in advance. I will summarize. This graphic was also provided by Mark Perry using data from the Association of American Medical Colleges, and this is medical school acceptance rates based on ethnic groups with the MCAT scores and GPA combined. Okay, so that's all it is. And essentially, what he summarized this, and he said a black student with average academic credentials, with the average GPA at MCAT, is 4 times more likely to be admitted compared to an Asian with the same credentials and nearly 3 times that of a white applicant. It's just data, right? And the AA, you say, well, you know what, that was that's old data, 2016. What does that have to do with anything? Well, starting, which I had the same thought, I went, shoot, that's an old slide. Starting in 2007, so I called Mark, and he said the AAMC no longer reports this data on acceptance rates by race, possibly because he would report and publicize it every year as it provided conclusive evidence of illegal racial preferences in U.S. medical schools. So, again, don't solve the problem. There's a problem in here, and it's solvable. But instead of doing that, let's just squelch the data. I mean, let's look at why kids aren't ready for school, why they're, and somebody was talking about K through 12, and there's a lot to unpack there. Now, with the SCOTUS decision, some of this is going to change, fortunately. Caution, there are many ways to juice the system. If you don't like the test results, you just get rid of the tests, right? MCAT's still in place, I believe, in most places. Already, 83% of all 4-year universities no longer require ACTs or SATs. So there's still a lot of subjective will room. Now, this is a little tongue-in-cheek, but for example, you might not want to put down for your extracurricular activity that you play the violin. Why would that be? Okay, these departments are not going to go away. That's the thing, right? There's way too much money. It's a huge business. So they're not going to go away just because of this one little decision. All right. Okay, I think we're going to get there. All right, so here we go. University of Minnesota Medical School orientation video I'm going to show you, and we'll see how this goes, right? And then and you'll might have to help me get this ahead. Okay, so this is their students read an updated Hippocratic Oath that appears to commit the entire class to a variety of contested political viewpoints. Here we go.
With gratitude, we, the students of the University of Minnesota Twin Cities Medical School Class of 2026, stand here today among our friends, families, peers, mentors, and communities who have supported us in reaching this milestone. Our institution is located on Dakota land. Today, many Indigenous people throughout the state, including Dakota and Ojibwe, call the Twin Cities home. We also recognize this acknowledgement is not enough. We commit to uprooting the legacy and perpetuation of structural violence deeply embedded within the healthcare system. We recognize inequities built by past and present traumas rooted in white supremacy, colonialism, the gender binary, ableism, and all forms of oppression. As we enter this profession with opportunity for growth,
just torturing myself. Okay, I think it had kind of a Stepford Wives quality to it. And I mean, the kids, the poor students, they look like hostages there. I don't know what they believe. Anyway, FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, criticized the school for forcing anybody to profess these political views. The university waffled and said that the oath would not be required and that students are free to reject it. They already said it, right? But ethic oaths are trending at medical schools nationwide. They go beyond the traditional promises of just do no harm. Similar student-authored oaths were already adopted in recent years at medical schools like Harvard, Columbia, WashU, Pitt Med, and the Icahn School of Medicine. So with the remaining few minutes, let's just take a quick look. What can we do? The DEI ideologues have broached the moat, they've broached the castle, they're marching, and they're not going to stop. But there are rays of hope. At present, the thing that is having the most impact is public outcry, which requires exposure and transparency, right? So here, okay, you say, what is that? Okay, that is what it looks like. It is a sanitary products machine inside a urinal. What? Okay. The boys in the boys' restroom at Lake Ridge High School in Lake Oswego, Oregon, are showing the school how they feel about having feminine hygiene dispensers in their space. And get this, so there's something called the Oregon Menstrual Dignity Act, and it requires that they put these in all bathrooms. And that affects over 500,000 K through 12 students and all the universities and so forth. So I thought that was pretty cool. I said, good job, boys. And they're investigating. They're investigating who did this. Gee, I wonder. Okay, also Kenny, I don't know how many of you know or met Kenny Chu. He started Color Us United and is pushing back on DEI policies in medical schools. He just had a big win at the University of North Carolina School of Medicine, and his strategy was, one of many, but the strategy was to inform the trustees who apparently did not know that the faculty was being forced to signing these fealty oaths, plus a whole host of other DEI recommendations in the strategic plan. The trustees, they woke up and they pumped the brakes. It was good, but it didn't stop the car, okay? The trustees' intervention, we could call that a win. The weeds will come back. They're already doing some backsliding at UNC because the trustees started getting some heat, so that's what happens. You start softening the language. Never turn your back. Trust but verify. And to use a quip on trust from Louisiana State Senator John Kennedy, he said, I would trust that about as much as gas station sushi. So, well-intended, doesn't cut it. An aside, trustees usually follow the direction of the university president, who tends to control the meeting agendas and information flow, but trustees need to wake up and do their jobs of oversight. They need to read the materials, they need to ask hard questions, they need to demand accountability, and this is the same with corporate boards. So anyway, back to Stanley Goldfarb and his organization, Do No Harm. They fight for individual patients and against identity politics. They're getting a lot of, he's really put together a pretty formidable army of medical professionals. I would call him, I would get on the website, take a look, see how you might participate if it's of interest. I think he's really taken off just in the last year. Also, we're almost there, we mentioned the free speech groups forming. These are Alumni Free Speech Alliance members. It started with just 1 or 2 colleges, and now all of these schools, Lafayette, Stanford, Princeton, all of these schools have Free Speech Alliance groups. And see if your school has one, and also reach out to the national group. They will help you start one at your school. They'll help give you the tools that you need, and they're very, very supportive of each other. So that's the whole thing. We're building a coalition. This is the, Science, okay, 12 years ago, Peter Wood, National Association of Scholars president, posed the provocative question, could science leave the university? And Scott Turner of NAS wrote a compelling piece and said, yes, it is past time. While science and universities are seemingly inextricably entwined, it's time to think outside the box, that maybe it's time to find ways to do science without the influence of the university indoctrination. And I have a link to the article, which is outstanding. And then finally, elections matter, right? Leadership, legislative reforms, such as cutting financial support, putting constraints on where the money goes, demanding that schools have skin in the game, all kinds of any tools that can occur because of Congress, your local representatives. We are not paying enough attention to how important that is. We need Congress and watchdogs for very close scrutiny of where the tax dollars go. It's all based on who we elect. Again, starve the beast. And then finally, couple minutes. This is a nice thought to close. I don't know how many of you know of Dr. Scott Atlas. He's a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, former professor at Stanford School of Medicine. The case for speaking out, it empowers others. So that is the thought I will close on. I mean, there's so much more we could talk about. I have in my deck, I have a slide, a video of college students who are all for equity and diversity. And then they start talking, they get asked about their football team, right? The Gators. And oh my gosh, you should just see their head spin. And they immediately start saying, no, we want to win, we want to win. And then they talk about, well, shouldn't that be true in everything? Wow, yeah, I guess you're right, So these poor little college kids are just getting fed. They're just getting fed and they're repeating what they learn. But then if you ask them to think, they get it. They get it. So we need to talk to kids and do what we can. So anyway, that's included in the deck if you want to watch that video. But thank you. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it. Thank you. Oh yeah, forgot about that. Any questions? I'll see what I can do.
I'm
Hello.
Dr. Doniparthi. My daughter is here in University of Arizona. At the time of her graduation, what I should say is her, what do you call, the residency match day, they spread out this LGBTQ stuff in front of all the family members. This is supposed to be an event for students who have obtained residency positions. But they spread out these things in your face.
Yes.
And I started speaking out. My kids said, please don't, please don't.
Yeah.
Because I said, if they can say it, I should be able to say it myself.
Absolutely. That's critical.
Yes.
Critical. And it's true. I understand we don't like that kind of attention. The kids, oh, Dad, don't make me look bad or whatever. But you have to do it. And they will remember this. And your courage is important. And I'm sure that, I bet 90% of the parents were thinking the same darn thing.
They were,
Yeah.
but they're afraid to speak up.
Right?
This is where free speech is being muddled and muzzled all over the place.
That's right.
So my question to you is, where is this beginning? How are these people being, who's influencing these policies in order to make it happen?
Honestly, we've asked ourselves that a lot, and we really think that it's almost like a cabal, which sounds ridiculous. But if you look at all the university presidents, they all went to the same schools, they travel in the same circles, they all think the same, and money. It's just like they get a lot of money from these big organizations, NIS, NIH, all kinds of, it's money. And those people are pushing, I think, a globalist agenda. And also, I think it's about chaos, frankly. Whoever the speaker was this morning that was talking, it's all about control. I don't think that they necessarily feel that strongly about this stuff as they do wanting to control behavior and sow chaos, which is kind of is working, don't you think? Yeah.
What would you recommend for alumni and taxpayers in states with public universities with boards appointed by governors, and half of them are red states, who are kind of fed up with this stuff?
Right, well, if you're the taxpayer, or the key is, first of all, it's hard to find the trustees. I don't know if you've tried to look up the trustees. Somebody had this great idea. They said, let's put their faces on a billboard, like during football season, stuff like that, because the trustees are signing off on this stuff, right? A lot of times they're not even aware of what it is, or they're too weak in the meetings to speak up. But they do, they love money and they don't love attention, right? So giving them as much attention as you possibly can is a really good thing, and speaking to the university presidents. But by the way, it's really hard. They have made it, I mean, there is a moat and a wall, and so it's our job to just be a pain in the neck. And you need fellow travelers. It's very hard to do by yourself. Really hard to do by yourself. And so maybe one of these groups is forming at your school, and you can, or reach out to the national organization. So, and they'll help you form a group, because you have to.
There's another group too, ACTA, the American
Yes.
Council. So you had mentioned fire, thank you.
Yes.
ACTA also.
No, ACTA is awesome. I would go on that site. They are really active. I think maybe even more so, fire does legal work, but ACTA is kind of fighting it on a lot of different fronts. It's a great organization. Anything else at the moment? I'm around, so you guys please come up and let's chat. Okay, thank you.